Okay, it looks like the majority of everyone is here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We are very lucky to have Nancy Hughes and Kelaine Revden here to speak with us today, and they will be talking about urban forestry. As always, as with all of our webinars, feel free to ask questions all webinar long. Go ahead, you can either enter any questions in the chat box if you want to, and make sure if you are entering them in the chat box, you do have them to all entire audience, or you can write them in the question box. I will probably be stopping a few times throughout the webinar just to address any questions that do come up. And otherwise, we will also have time at the end of each of the sessions or each of the PowerPoints to ask any other more general questions as well. So with that said, Nancy, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and I will let you go ahead and take over.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you, so yep.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. Now I'm already off the first slide. What did I do? Dangerous. Here we go. Well, good morning. At California Urban Forest Council, we always like to start a conversation by saying, can you imagine a great neighborhood without trees? We can't, and yet when decisions are being made about what's best for our community to thrive, the value provided by our trees, parks, and green spaces is often overlooked. That's why we started the Invest from the Ground Up campaign, so more people see that investing in these basic resources not only helps create great neighborhoods, we get back much more than we put in. I'm Nancy Hughes. I'm the ED at the California Urban Forest Council. And I did neglect to put anything in this presentation about our organization itself. You'll have an opportunity over the next year to learn a lot about us, and I'm going to get a big sheet of links to Dawn on places where you can do research and find out more about us. But just in a few words, we are one of 50 state councils in the United States, and they're all funded by the federal government through the Forest Service. Our efforts, and all the councils do things somewhat differently based on regional, local need. Our focus is on education, outreach, advocacy, and policy work. We have 7 regional councils across the state of California, and each of them do many interesting things differently. A lot of them are workshops, tree plantings, etc. But there's a lot going on in the state of California with urban forestry, and that's who we are in a nutshell. See if I can do this. I really need to grow a third arm here. Okay, I'm not seeming to. Let's try this again. There we go. We'll get it. Okay. So with that in mind, we've created this primer for you, but today is only the start. These are the things we will be looking at over the next 30 to 45 minutes or so, and building on this over the next year or so. When I finish, Kelaine Vargas-Ravden from Urban Ecos will share with you some of the tools available to help us get to our goals. And as Kristen said, none of you are muted, so feel free to ask questions or make comments along the way. So our topics, we'll be doing some defining, we'll be talking about benefits and services, who are the players in California and really across the country, how this gets done generally, and what we as AmeriCorps members with Civic Spark and the California Urban Forest Council will be doing, and then we'll have questions at the end. So maybe it's just a delay that I'm dealing with here. Not sure. Let me try this. Try this. Okay. So what is urban forestry? One or two folks have any thoughts on this? I'm opening it to the floor. Any eager contributors on the call? Okay, I'm back. Let's try this then. No contributors?
I'm not seeing anything popping into our question box, so I'm
Okay.
thinking no contributors at this time. Oh, wait, actually, we have Tommy Todd says growing trees in urban areas.
That's that's a really good start. And if I could just get the slide to advance, there we go. So there are many versions of what urban forestry means. I have not found the one definition that says it all from on high, but this gives a good representation. Often the word community is used as part of this title, so you'll see urban and community forestry, and that is to help round out a broader definition, which includes smaller towns and cities. So I'll take a volunteer who might like to read this, or I'm going to read it to you. So anybody eager? On participation is a big part of urban forestry. Okay, saying that, urban forestry is generally defined as the art, science, and technology of managing trees and forest resources in and around urban community ecosystems for the physiological, sociological, economic, and aesthetic benefits trees provide society. And that definition came off the CAL FIRE website. There are endless versions. So what is an urban forest? One is a practice, the other is the thing itself. An urban forest consists of all trees and understory plants on public and private property. This includes a diverse mix of vegetation managed by a broad group of individuals and groups located in a range of natural and urban settings, including natural areas, developed parks, other publicly owned properties, rights of way, and private property. There are many nuanced versions of this too, and often they are regionally based. So you can see I plucked this one from the city of Seattle. So this may be a statistic that you know or do not know, but trees play a really important role in Californians' lives, though many residents don't know it. So I'm going to do a bit of a drill down here. The next few slides reflect on the value trees bring to communities and the planet. I've put together, as I said earlier, a page of links, so I'll be getting those to you so you can find out the research and the science behind this and do a deeper dive if you'd like. And Don will distribute that to you. So in this case, we observe the direct environmental services provided by trees. They clean the air by absorbing carbon dioxide, sulfur, nitrous oxides, and other pollutants. They clean the water by capturing the pollutants with their leaves, branches, bark, and roots. They reduce stormwater runoff by intercepting and storing rainfall in the canopy and releasing water into the atmosphere through evapotranspiration. In addition, tree roots and leaf litter create soil conditions that promote the infiltration of rainwater into the soil. This helps to replenish our groundwater supply and maintain stream flow during dry periods. A mature tree can store 50 to 100 gallons of water during a large storm. I'm sure you all remember your lessons on photosynthesis and how trees convert carbon dioxide, CO2, into sugar, cellulose, and other carbon-containing carbohydrates that they use for food and growth. Trees are unique in their ability to lock up large amounts of carbon in their wood and continue to add carbon as they grow. This genius life-sustaining role is an important reason why we will all be working together on this project. And of course, places for wildlife to find shelter and food. So cooling the urban heat island. On hot, sunny day, the sun can heat dry, exposed urban surfaces such as roofs and pavement to temperatures 50 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the air, while shaded or moist surfaces remain close to air temperatures. So this slide illustrates temperature differentials based on density of development. And there's a lot more that goes into this as it relates to urban forestry, but we'll just touch on that today. So economics, benefits, and services that trees provide. Healthy, well-cared-for trees add up to 20% to a property's value and increase the saleability of that home. When the home sells at the higher price, the city benefits from increased tax revenue. Shoppers will travel further and spend more time in a district with high-quality trees and are willing to spend between 9 and 12% more for products. In 2009, California supported over 60,000 urban forestry-related jobs, resulting in $3.3 million in individual income and billion and $3.5 billion to the state economy. The net cooling effect of a young, healthy tree is equivalent to 10 room-size air conditioners operating 20 hours a day. And if you plant a tree today on the west side of your home, in 5 years, your energy bill should be 3% less. In 15 years, the savings will be nearly 12%. Shaded streets and parking lots prolong the life of pavement, saving up to 60% of repair costs. So social benefits. The list is long when we evaluate the opportunities shaded streets and outdoor spaces provide. Creating a high-quality experience supports outdoor activity, reducing stress and enhancing revitalization and positive engagement. Visual exposure to a setting with trees reduces blood pressure and muscle tension. Hospital stays are reduced for those whose rooms have views of trees, plus there is reduced negative behavior. Trees absorb sounds. A stand of trees 98 feet wide by 48 feet tall can reduce noise levels by 6 to 10 decibels. People report a stronger sense of unity in communities where there are trees. Streetscaping can reduce accidents by 5 to 20% and slows drivers down. Crime reduction. Graffiti, vandalism, and littering in outdoor spaces with natural landscapes is reduced compared to areas with no green. And studies of public housing and apartment buildings reveal fewer crimes when trees and landscaping are present. So, trees improve quality of life across the board, and our job together will be to demonstrate this to civic leaders and residents in California. So, who is involved? This is a lot. What do you know, who do you know that works with trees in communities? So I'm just going to talk about this slide for a minute. I'm not going to read it all. But the biggest players in California in terms of funding and research are the USDA, the Forest Service, and their urban community forestry programs. They have a research division and they have state and private division, which we receive our funding through, and CAL FIRE, which is California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, and there is an urban forestry division there. In terms of the biggest nonprofits that work in California, the Western chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture, they are focused on best management practices, training people in how to care for trees, and the science behind tree care. Our organization, and then California Relief, which is a statewide nonprofit that supports the local nonprofits around California. So in Sacramento, there's Sacramento Tree Foundation. In Fresno, there's Tree Fresno. And in LA, there's Tree People. There are many, many organizations, large and small, around California. Any criteria that any of you think I should add to this list? I just kind of did a mind dump here, and the different organizations, the different city departments, different individuals that play a role in urban forestry in California. there any criteria that I might have forgotten?
And Nancy,
How do
as
you see
we
interaction amongst these players? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say
Okay.
if people wanted to think about that and get any criteria or any other agencies that they can think of that might not be on the list, we'll give them a little bit of time to do so. And also, we had a question that just came in a little bit ago on how do trees reduce crime. I believe you said that a slide or two ago, and so they were just asking for a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so I'm not the researcher on that information, but I certainly can get you the scientific research that supports that. So I'd be happy to do that later. But there's been a lot of research in terms of crime and improvements in neighborhoods based on tree canopy and parks, etc. So it's really, a lot of it has to do with comfort and quality of life, but we'll have more on that later. So for me to just finish and to build on what Kristen just mentioned, we can get into this in terms of criteria or any other groups or individuals that you might think would be part of this network at the question and answer period as well. So, and a couple other things then to think about. How do you see interactions amongst these players working? Some of them work really well. Some of them don't work as well. And those are things you'll come up against when we're doing this work. And so what might impede progress or support success? So those are some things to think about as we move forward here. So CAL FIRE, which I just described, they have a strategic plan that was written and approved in 2013 and goes through 2018. And these are the goals, the 3 goals of their plan. So our work with Civic Spark is being funded by CAL FIRE through a grant from the U.S. Forest Service. So it is important that we will be keeping an eye on their requirements. And there's a link here, but I'll also get that for you later. And keep in mind these goals are for their state itself, so based on their legal responsibility and their desired actions, so for their department. And our program deliverables will be expanded beyond these, so we have a little bit more creativity in our opportunities in front of us. So Civic Spark and urban forestry. This project will focus on disadvantaged communities within the 8-county San Joaquin Valley. There's an opportunity later next year if we desire and we find the time that we might be able to expand this to other regions, but we just don't know that. So we're focusing solely currently on San Joaquin. And the target cities and counties that we'll be working in will be based on need, potential for greenhouse gas emissions reductions, engagement, and political leadership. And many of you are already working on exciting projects where urban forestry will be an excellent addition to your outcomes. We will provide strategic statewide general and technical support for the rollout of the 2014 CAL FIRE Urban Forestry Program, which is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, focusing on local government agencies and disadvantaged communities. So LGC and California Urban Forest Council will produce the following deliverables. It's not limited to this, but this is really our scope of work when we're out there. So we'll have educational materials. The project team will create fact sheets for local policymakers and community members. These fact sheets will help create community and political support for urban forestry projects and strong applications for the next round of CAL FIRE grants. Regional workshops. The project team will conduct a minimum of 3 workshops in northern, central, and southern San Joaquin Valley to provide information about urban forestry, cap and trade funding opportunities, and eligible projects and best practices. These workshops will be aimed at local government staff, community members, and nonprofit organizations with the goal of creating strong interest and new partnerships for the next round of CAL FIRE grants. Policymaker forums. The LGC will conduct dinners in northern, central, and southern San Joaquin Valley for local elected officials to build political support and local champions for urban forestry efforts. And then technical assistance. The project team will provide technical assistance to interested local government in disadvantaged communities within the San Joaquin Valley. This will include staff support from California Urban Forest Council and LGC and on-the-ground training and assistance. So how we might do this. This process on this slide is called adaptive management, and it is commonly used for management planning and resource management. This model provides a good conceptual framework for how we might work in communities, going through steps A through D, but realizing that we will often revisit steps along the way. The training tomorrow on the Urban Forest Management Plan Toolkit will take you through in much more detail on how this works. So some of you may have already seen this or spent time with it, the Cal and Virus Screen 2.0. Our process will be informed by this, which is a screening tool that identifies California communities that are burdened by multiple sources of pollution along with other criteria. So this will be part of how we will determine where we will actually be able to work. And our work products. So we will be doing presentations, we will be doing coaching, and the coaching will be on opportunities for these disadvantaged communities to create tree inventories, urban forestry management plans, policies and ordinances, and tree planting and care. So you won't have to be doing those yourself specifically, but you will be educated and informed on how these different program opportunities can benefit the communities that you'll be working in. So a recap. We talked about urban forestry terms. We talked about benefits and services of trees. We talked about who is involved and how we may get it done together, and what we will do specifically. So before I open up for questions, I want to let you know that the California Urban Forest Council will be bringing a dedicated staff member for this project at the end of this month or early next year, who will be working with Civic Spark Urban Forestry team hand in hand, going to the meetings and workshops and supporting you with the technical expertise needed to be successful. LGC and California Urban Forest Council will be laying out the calendar for 2015 on Thursday, and this will get going fully just as soon as the contract is signed with the state of California. And we are looking forward to working with you all. So any questions, comments?
Thank you so much, Nancy. We did get one other comment more than a question. Well, any of you guys want to type in some other questions that you might have. And that was just a resource called the Green Print Summit series, which you can find by the Sacramento Tree Foundation on YouTube. And apparently they have a few different speakers and whatnot that might be helpful for anyone who is also working in.
That's right. I did attend that one this last January, and there's some excellent speakers there that touch on a lot of the things that I just momentarily illuminated. So yeah, it's a really great one. And that Green Print program for Sacramento region is a pretty powerful tool, and they've been building that now for many years, and it's making a difference. anything else, folks? Well, if not, I would like to turn the floor
Oh, wait.
over.
Actually, we do.
Okay.
Just one other comment. iTree is another useful tool. And then also, we did have a question, which is what communities are affected most around urban forests? In other words, who's usually the largest or the target audience, I guess, in general?
Well, first of all, yes, I want to just say the iTree is an amazing tool, and Colleen is going to be going into some detail on
I
that
thought she was.
momentarily. Yeah, and well, and the question about which communities are most affected by urban forestry, that is really a good question and one that can be answered many different ways. So um, almost any city or community where there's people, houses, freeways, you know, gray infrastructure, and all other things that define what a city would be are affected by urban forests, whether standing or lacking. And so all of the benefits that I listed off are only derived if those there are healthy tree canopies in communities. So you can be affected positively or you can be affected negatively depending on what the state of any particular urban forest is. And I think you'll see across California some communities um, have really excellent urban forest canopies, street trees, park trees, well cared for, well invested in, and others do not. And we could talk about that for a long time, why it is that way. But these are the efforts that we're making today are being put forward to address that for the betterment of everyone in California.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think that was the last question that came in now. Maybe after Colleen speaks, we will be able to answer a few other questions in general as well. Excellent.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
So let's see.
And now let's welcome Colleen Rafton.
And Colleen, you are unmuted as well now.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Nancy, for the invitation. And thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning. My name is Colleen Ravden. I'm an urban forestry and urban ecology consultant. I have a background in urban forestry research with the Forest Service, including a lot of the basic research that underlies the tools that we're going to talk about today. And now I work for myself, helping organizations, nonprofits, cities, universities use trees to be more green. So helping them to understand strategically how we can plant trees and other kinds of vegetation to help us provide some of those benefits that Nancy talked about. So I have been asked today to talk about some of the tools, and I realized when I called this originally Tools for Urban Forestry that a normal person would think of things like shovels and augers and things used to measure trees. But my job today is to talk about technology tools that you can use to quantify some of the benefits of urban forests and also to help you understand better the principles that underlie how these things work. So before we get started, I know that there's a pretty wide, let me see if, even though we've already practiced this, I have to figure out how to make this guy go forward. Okay, hang on. Aha, there we go. All right, so before we get started with the actual tools themselves, I want to make sure that we have sort of a common basis of knowledge of what we're talking about here. And I understand that I guess that a couple of you in the end will really be focusing specifically on this in your project, but I think it's helpful for everybody to have some basic knowledge about these things too. So to start and put us all on the same page, I'm sure this is a review for some people, but for some people it will be completely new. I want to talk about how trees actually provide greenhouse gas benefits. And there's two ways that they do that. The first is direct. So trees actually pull carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, out of the atmosphere, transform it through photosynthesis into carbon, and then they use that carbon to build a tree, to make the trunk, the branches, the leaves, the roots, and all of those components that go into the tree. So already you've noticed that I've done two things here with language that I want to clarify. This presentation is driving me crazy. Sorry, everybody. Hang on one second. Let me try this. There we go. I'm going to use those little things at the bottom corner. Okay, so we talk about the process of pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as sequestration. There is a movement to distinguish the annual value. So this is a little bit tricky, and so I'm trying to make it clear from the start. The amount that happens in an annual increment, to call that sequestration, and then to talk about the total amount of carbon stored in the tree over its lifetime as storage. So for those of you who will be out there working with local governments, helping them to apply for grants to plant trees to fight climate change, or to develop projects to make the best use of trees to fight climate change, a lot of times you're going to have to quantify these benefits. And you're probably going to be asked to quantify them on an annual basis, like how much work did this tree do in 2015, and to estimate the whole lifetime's worth of benefit that a tree is going to give. So again, there's a kind of a tendency to talk about sequestration as the annual amount and storage as the total amount, but it's an arbitrary distinction that's kind of made up. And so one thing that you'll have to get used to, including during my presentation, though I do my best to keep them separate, is figuring out which one we're talking about. And another bit of loose language that happens out there is this use of the term greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, and carbon as if they were synonymous. They're not really synonymous. There are a lot of greenhouse gases other than carbon dioxide. But in urban forestry, the one we really care about is CO2. Carbon dioxide and carbon are obviously not the same thing, but carbon dioxide is what's getting pulled out of the air. Carbon's what's getting stored in the tree. So we use them all synonymously and in a way that's kind of okay, because you'll find, if you haven't already, that in the world of climate change, we always talk about greenhouse gas emissions and greenhouse gas emission reductions in terms of tons of CO2 equivalents. So even if you were working with a landfill to capture methane that's being released from the landfill, and let's say your landfill, you were capturing, say, 10,000 tons of methane. Methane is a much less common, but much, much, much more potent greenhouse gas. So you would translate your tons of captured methane into tons of CO2 equivalents, so that we're all talking about the same thing. So know that whichever one of these terms I use, I'm always talking about CO2 equivalents, either in tons or in kilograms or in pounds. Okay, so that's the direct benefit of trees. They pull greenhouse gases out of the air and lock them up in the actual tree matter itself. Then we have an indirect greenhouse gas benefit. And in places like the Central Valley, where it's hot, very hot and dry, this benefit can be as great as, or even bigger than, the benefit that you get from the trees actually locking up that carbon. And what they're doing in this case is, if we plant them strategically to shade a building, so usually on the west or the east sides of a building in particular, we shade that building, we lower the temperature inside, we need to use less air conditioning to cool the building, therefore we're producing less energy at the power plant, and we're creating less greenhouse gases in the production of energy. So that all sounds kind of really far and indirect, but in fact it's an enormously valuable benefit, again, especially in the Central Valley and other hot parts of California. I'm in San Francisco. In San Francisco, we don't have air conditioning. Almost nobody has air conditioning. So this benefit is not of very much value to us, but as I understand it, most of the work that you'll be doing is in these parts of California where the temperature can be 115 degrees, and a tree can really make a big difference. These benefits, in keeping with that last slide, are always presented on an annual basis. And they're going to be really pretty small in the beginning, as the tree is small and doesn't really do much to shade the building. But as the tree gets bigger and bigger, they'll become equal to or even greater than the benefits from sequestration. We're also going to talk, I'm going to talk really quickly about some of those other benefits that Nancy mentioned. And the reason we want to be able to talk either in a narrative way about these other co-benefits, we call them, or in a quantitative way, is because to be honest, urban forestry is definitely not the most cost-efficient way to reduce greenhouse gases. Um, so this is a chart that I found. It dates back, the study's a little bit old, it's from 2007, but mainly I just wanted you to get a general idea of how there are all these different ways to capture greenhouse gases or to reduce them, and they have different levels of cost efficiency. So on the far left there is to improve the building insulation, and that actually, it actually pays for itself. So the idea there is it costs you obviously a certain amount to insulate your building, but it pays for itself in terms of your reduced heating costs, and it more than gives back the cost in terms of the greenhouse gases that are reduced, again, by reducing the energy use that you need to cool and heat the building. And then as we go along this chart from the left to the right, we see things like increasing the fuel efficiency of vehicles, we see the use of nuclear power, we see low-cost forestry, middle-cost forestry, shifting from coal to gas. The truth is, urban forestry probably is way out here on the far right-hand side of this. Trees in urban areas are very expensive to take care of, much more expensive than they are here in these like middle-cost forestry where we're talking about trees in an actual forest that don't require much maintenance. But trees in cities have so many other benefits that go along with them, and we need to consider all of those things at the same time. So some of the tools that we're talking about will actually help quantify these co-benefits. One of them is managing stormwater. So trees, as Nancy mentioned, help us to capture stormwater. They slow the flow of it into our storm drains. They help to filter it. The soil that's underneath a tree planted in a city does a huge amount of work in that regard as well. So that's something that many cities in California are struggling with. How can we deal with our stormwater better so that the water that runs off of our lawns and streets is cleaner and less prone to flooding? And trees in cities are one great way to do that. So that's an important co-benefit. Another important co-benefit is improving air quality. And again, in the Central Valley, this is going to be a huge issue with the severe problems that they have with smog in the Central Valley, making it some of the worst air in the country. So trees can help in a couple of ways. They can capture particles. They can capture particles on their leaves and let them get washed down into the soil and then filtered away. And a lot of these particles that I'm talking about aren't necessarily themselves toxic. It's just simply by virtue of their small size, when they enter our lungs, that they can cause us health problems. It's not so. To allow them to be captured and washed away might sound like it's not a great solution. But in some cases it's a perfectly fine solution because they're not themselves dangerous. It's just by virtue of their size. We want to get rid of them if we can. For gaseous pollutants like smog, nitrogen dioxides, sulfur dioxides, the trees actually can pull those gaseous pollutants out of the air and help us protect them in that way. One interesting thing that is definitely gets overlooked is, this was very interesting to me. On here we have talking about the value of trees in parking lots shading parked cars. So a study in Sacramento, which is of course in the Central Valley and has a similar climate to the rest of it, found that 16% of the air pollution caused by vehicles, which is a huge component of the air pollution in those parts of the state and the country, 16% comes from cars that aren't running. And I thought that was almost unbelievable. But you have cars sitting in a parking lot, which is already much, much hotter than other, the black asphalt, the heat, the inside of the car gets very hot. And so pollutants are leaking from the engine, from leaky hoses and the radiator and all those places. Just because it's so hot, they're evaporating and moving out into the air. So if we can work to shade parking lots, lower the temperature of the atmosphere in that parking lot and lower the temperature inside the cars, we can actually do a lot to fight air pollution in that way. And then Nancy mentioned a bunch of other co-benefits like reduced crime, and I just wanted to throw out there that I think since somebody asked, the most likely explanation, if there's an actual causal relationship, and I'm not totally sure that there's not just a correlation between trees equal neighborhoods where a lot of money is already going from both the people that live there and from the city itself, which means that there's already lower crime. I'm sure that's a big part of it, but that should have been accounted for in these studies. So if there's any kind of causal relationship between trees and crime, it probably has to do with the fact that if you can improve the environment, the feeling of the environment outside, encourage people to spend more time outside, it helps to reduce crime. So if everybody's locked in their apartment behind the closed doors and windows, no one's seeing what's going on. But if we have people moving onto porches or out onto their stoop or onto a chair underneath a tree, then we have eyes out there, and that really is probably the thing that does the most to discourage crime. And then again, we talked about trees and health. So in the process of your project of helping your local governments understand the benefits of trees in terms of climate change, it's also really helpful to help people understand these other benefits that go along with them, to make it clear that even though trees might be a more expensive solution, they bring a lot along with them that, say, capturing, not that I'm putting this down, but capturing methane in a landfill does not offer these co-benefits in the same way. Still a valuable service, obviously, but so some things to think about there. So if you want some more information on the benefits of trees in a really easy to access way so that you can have good luck sharing it with other people, there's a series of community tree guides for 7 regions in California, and I'll talk more about those regions in just a minute. But these links, there'll be a PDF that goes out to everybody on the call, and these links will be live, so you can just click on them and you can access this tree guide for your particular region, or read a couple of them. They're very similar to each other, but the newer ones have maybe a bit more information than the older ones. But they talk a lot about these other kinds of benefits, and they also have the references in the back so that you can dig into the science yourself if you're interested in pursuing that. So one thing I want to make clear is we're going to talk about half a dozen or so tools today, and it's important to understand that, interestingly, the data that underlie all of them is essentially the same. And it was mostly performed by an organization that used to be called the Center for Urban Forest Research, which is where I used to work, which was a research division of the U.S. Forest Service. That the Center for Urban Forest Research has now changed its name to the, I think, incomprehensible Urban Ecosystems and Social Dynamics Program, which doesn't really tell us very much about it. But if you think of it in your head like the rest of us do as a Center for Urban Forest Research, it will make a lot more sense to you. It's led by Dr. Greg McPherson, and if you have not already, you will certainly hear his name 1,000 times over in the next year as you continue with these projects. He has been working on quantifying these environmental benefits of urban forestry for 30 years probably. And I've given you the link to their website. It's unfortunately not as user-friendly as it used to be, but it's so full of great information and there's peer-reviewed papers and more easily accessible research summaries. It's definitely worth digging in there and trying to find all the good stuff that lies within. So just a quick few comments about the research itself. So what we did at the time, this was a 15-year project, so including the time that I was there, is we divided the country into 16 regions, which were similar in terms of climate. Originally, we had intended to just do California, and that's why California has 7 regions, and the rest of the country is much more, they're much bigger. But there was such a demand across the country for these projects that we decided to continue with it. So within each region, we picked a reference city, and we traveled to that reference city and did a huge amount of work on measuring the growth of trees. So we picked the 20 most common species. We looked at 50 specimens of each of those species at probably 20 different characteristics, like the crown diameter, the trunk diameter, the tree height, the crown height, the leaf surface area. We pulled leaves off and we fed them through a leaf meter to measure how much area the leaves covered. From that data, we developed growth curves showing how those trees, each of those species, changes over time. We collected hourly air quality data for a bunch of different pollutants. We gathered hourly weather data on precipitation and temperature, solar radiation, a bunch of other things. Then we took the growth data from the trees and formed carbon equations that tell us how much carbon is locked up in a tree from forestry. and then had to adjust those numbers based on urban conditions. Urban trees grow quite differently from trees in a forest. For one thing, they tend to be a lot wider. And then we, with some complicated computer models, modeled the energy benefits associated with the trees, and then the stormwater benefits that we would get from the water that's captured on the leaves. And each one of these regions took about a year to do. Let's see here. Whoops. Okay, so to get into the tools, finally, the thing that you all came for, we have 5 broad categories, or 4 broad categories, and there's not really an order to this presentation. I tried to figure out a way to describe them in terms of whether I liked them better or whether they were easier to use or more suited to the task, and there's just so many ways of looking at them that in the end I made a chart to show you what features each one has to help you decide which one might be most useful for what you want to get done. So I did start with the tree carbon calculator because in some senses it's the simplest of them all, and it offers one feature that I think is really valuable that I'll show you at the end. So the tree carbon calculator is kind of old school. It's an Excel file that you download. It's got a lot of macros running in the background that do these calculations for you. So it feels like 1997, which some of you probably aren't even old enough to remember. But bear with it. It does everything that we need it to, and it has some. All of these things have some bugs, but the bugs on this one happen right up front and don't affect the quality of the data. And I think that's the thing that I like the best about it. So the tree carbon calculator, this is all there is to it. This one screen. It's got 3 major components. So our job. So the purpose of the tree carbon calculator is to calculate the greenhouse gas benefits of an individual tree, both in terms of the amount that the tree captures and stores inside, the amount it sequesters, and then the amount, if you want, it can also tell you the amount, it can estimate the amount of greenhouse gas benefit associated with reductions in energy use. So to get those numbers out of it, there are project inputs, there are tree-specific inputs, and then the bottom row are the outputs of the data that you are looking for. So to show you each one of those more in detail, one thing I want to say is I gave an hour-and-a-half long presentation on how to use the tree carbon calculator a couple months ago to people who are applying for these large urban forestry grants that are available. So should it come to that for any of you, I'm happy to do that again. So I'm not going to, this is not a how-to lesson. This is a have a look, get comfortable with what's out there, and just know what's available to you. That's my goal today. So the tree carbon calculator, let's dig in a little bit deeper. The project inputs are really very straightforward. You can either tell the software, I want to look at trees based on how old they are, which is what you'd really use to estimate something in the future. So I want to see what this tree will do when it's 40 years old, say. Or you can estimate the carbon benefits based on the tree's DBH. That's its diameter at breast height. That's how we always talk about tree size. I'll use DBH interchangeably with trunk diameter just because I think that is obviously easier for people to understand who are new to urban forestry, but DBH is the industry standard for talking about tree size. So if you had a tree out there and you knew how big its diameter at breast height was, then that's what you would want to do here. So you can either choose to look at the age or the DBH of the tree. The next most important thing is you're going to enter the climate zone. So remember we talked about the fact that there are 7 climate zones in California, and these benefits are climate zone specific. So that's a really important part of the whole thing. These emissions factors are associated with those energy reduction benefits. I would just leave these as their default option. So those are the project inputs will stay the same for any project. And then inside within a project, you're going to have individual trees. And so if you want to calculate the greenhouse gas storage of a particular tree or the amount that it's going to sequester in a year, you only need 2 pieces of information. You need its species, and there's a drop-down list of species choices. And you need either its age, the age you want to study, or its trunk diameter, right now. If you enter those two things, you already get an output down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the total CO2 stored or the carbon sequestration for that year. That's all you need to enter to get that carbon that's been sequestered by the tree number. If you're also interested in looking at the energy conservation benefits of your tree, you need to go a little bit farther. And here we need to know the relationship between the tree and the building. So we'll look at the tree azimuth. That's the direction from the building to the tree. Is it on the west side? Is it on the south side? How far from the building is it? So if it's more than 60 feet, it doesn't actually get attributed a benefit in terms of energy conservation. But the closer the tree is, the more it shades the building. And then some of these other ones are not so important to discuss right now. But the building vintage, how old is the building that it's shaded, which gives us some impression of its what kind of windows it has, what kind of insulation it has, that kind of thing, how energy efficient the building is itself. Again, heating emissions factors associated with how the heating is created, and then some questions about whether the building has air conditioning or heating. But most of the time, you would just leave those things as their defaults. So if we input those pieces of information as well, we get a row of project outputs. And that was, again, that bottom line in that Excel table, the project outputs. So one by one, it shows us the energy reductions associated with that particular tree in that location around that particular building. This tree, in the year that we're looking at it, will reduce our energy use by about 191 kilowatt hours. It's actually going to, so this is a negative number for heating reductions because it's actually going to cost us, I don't remember exactly what I put in for this specific tree, but sometimes a tree, particularly an evergreen tree planted, especially on the south side of a building, will cost us a bit in terms of heat because it's blocking some of that winter sun that would warm us up. So one of the things that I mentioned that I think is really valuable about the tree carbon calculator that offers a great feature for you is you can actually go in and so easily change any of those inputs and see how these numbers change and really get a sense of, hey, if I plant this evergreen tree to the south, it's actually costing me heating energy because it's blocking the winter sun. So what happens if I move it a little bit to the west, or what happens if I move it to the east? If I plant it to the north, does it have any energy benefit at all? And the answer to that is probably not. So that's one thing I really like about it, is how easy it is to see things change. Okay, so we've got a reduction in cooling energy for this tree. We've got a slight, this is really small, that's like $1 worth of energy increase in the heating costs for that tree. We've got some, and then we've got the emissions reductions associated with the fact that we're not using as much energy. So because we're going to use 200 or so kilowatt hours less of electricity to use the air conditioning, we're going to create 75.8 kilograms less CO2 in this particular year for that particular tree. We're going to actually spend a little bit more. We're going to give off a little bit of CO2 because we need to increase our heating use. And feel free to jump in with questions because I know that this is complicated. So if I need to say something in a different way to make it make more sense, just please let me know. So here together, this is just 75.8 minus 5.2 is our number over here. Sequestration. So again, this is the annual value. That's the amount of CO2 that tree is captured in the year that we're talking about. And next to it is the total CO2 stored in the tree as a whole, up to that point in time. The above ground biomass is not something that you'll probably be doing a project that will make this relevant. The only time this would really be relevant is if you had a project where you were talking about dead trees and you were going to cut them down and use them for something else. We'd want to know how much wood was that you were going to make use of. So there will be some wood use projects, but that's kind of an obscure thing. All right. So just to reiterate again, because one of the quirks of this project is that whoever edited it, did not do a very good job of labeling the units. So all of these units should be annual. They should all be kilowatt hours per tree per year. And this one is total for the tree to date. So whenever you're working on one of these projects or doing these kinds of calculations, just make sure you keep coming back and asking yourself, make sure you're using the right numbers to reference the thing that you're trying to do. The biggest problem with a tree carbon calculator is that it doesn't have a good way, it doesn't have any good outputs. All you get as an output is that line of data, and so you have to actually build your own template to capture it. You just have to cut and paste, but it's still a very tedious way to get this done. It's one of the things that I would like to see fixed, is a way to track that over time so that you have a good report at the end. And so this is what I just mentioned, and this is one of the things I would encourage everybody to just play with for a little while, is enter your climate zone, the climate zone that you're working in, and then keep everything the same and only change one variable. What happens if I change, what happens if I say the tree is 40 years old, let me look at a really big tree, like an oak tree, and compare it to a really small tree. How does my total carbon store change over time? And you'll see that a 40-year-old oak tree is going to capture several tons of carbon, and some smaller trees will be less than a ton. And I think that that's going to really help people to understand how to plan projects that are much more functional. So the rules are pretty straightforward. The bigger the tree you can plant, the better off you're going to be. And then you can, then put the oak tree in there that's 40 years old and change the direction from the tree to the building and see how that changes the energy benefits, to just to get a sense and a feel for how all of these things work. So this is the first slide, and in the end there'll be a whole table that shows all these things together, so that you can compare all of them. But so let me just go through this first time so that I can make sense of it. The questions you'd want to know about any of these tools are: how many trees can you look at a time? Can you look at a whole bunch of trees, like a whole population of trees? Can you just do a few at a time, or can you only do one at a time? And with a tree carbon calculator, you can only do one at a time. Then what benefits does it give you information about? Can it tell you about the amount of carbon that's stored in the tree over the lifetime? Can it only the amount of carbon that's stored in? Hang on one second, everybody. Sorry about this.
Sign here and then print the journal.
1 second, everybody. I'm so sorry.
Can you put print for me?
I did. Thanks.
Can I take my?
Okay. So what benefits does it show us? Does it show us the total carbon stored? Does it show us an annual value? Does it show us about energy conservation? And does it show us some of those other, the two probably most important other co-benefits that we can quantify: stormwater and air quality? Does it project benefits for the future? So for instance, if you're doing a grant application for this next year's round of grants for CAL FIRE, we were asked to estimate benefits going 40 years in the future. Can it project them in that way? And the answer for the tree carbon calculator is it can, if you trick it to do so. And if we ever get to that point, I'll be happy to show you how to do that. But it's not intended, it's not designed to do that necessarily. I'm going to skip over this question of species matching for now because it's just too convoluted, and I don't think we have enough time for that. But we can talk more about it if it's relevant. Does it have a useful reporting feature? Is there a way to get the data out of it in a way that you can use it? And the answer here is definitely no. And I want to give a sense of how much effort is required. Some of these tools are quick and dirty, and some of them literally involve months-long projects. So in this case, it's going to take you a couple hours because it's going to take you a little time to get used to it. Once you're used to it, you can get your answers back in 30 seconds. And then what's the format of each of these different tools? And here, again, it's this quirky little Excel file. All right, tool number 2. Really quick and dirty, the National Tree Benefits Calculator. This one's online. There's the website down there for you. In this case, all you do is enter your zip code, or you can select your zone from the map, and it's the same map that I showed you before. You choose a species from the list, very long list that's specific to that climate region. You enter the diameter of the tree and what kind of building is nearby, and you hit calculate. And that's it. You get your benefits in a tabbed table like this. here it shows you the benefits in terms of both dollars and values. And so that can be helpful to people who, a lot of us don't have any sense of what a kilowatt hour is. And so if we can translate that into a dollar number, it helps people say, oh yeah, here's my energy bill is normally $75, and you're going to save me $10 a month in energy. I get that. I can grasp what kind of sense that makes. So this one does stormwater, energy, air quality, and CO2. The property value one is not something I'm really going to talk about today because I just don't think a lot of these tools won't help you quantify that. But generally the idea here is that a tree planted outside of a house raises the value of that house. And there's pretty good research documenting that. The research to put a number on it is a little bit less clear, but we've been very conservative here, and it's usually only about 1% of the property value. In California, houses are so expensive that 1% is actually quite a lot of actual dollars. But the idea is that sort of a lot of intrinsic things are captured in that. Maybe this crime question, the health question, the simple question of how beautiful trees are and how much we like to have them around us. For a local government, this actually can be a pretty compelling point. So maybe it is something to think a little bit more about in your cases, because as a person's property value increases, once they've sold the house, of course, so too does the property tax level returned to the city. So there is an argument to be made at a citywide level that helping people improve their property values increases the amount of money that is returned to the community in terms of property taxes. So it is something worth thinking about. All right. So I just want to call out in specifics on this one since that's what we're talking about. This is an annual value. And again, see here in this case, it's not really necessarily easy to tell that. So you kind of have to know, oh wait, here we go. This year, your oak tree will reduce atmospheric carbon by 594 pounds. So here's my problem right off the bat with this tree carbon calculator, with this national tree benefit calculator. It's saying that the tree has a direct benefit of about 500 pounds. And these are avoided emissions that has to do with our energy reduction of about, it's hard to say, but maybe 180 or 190. When you add those two things together, you don't get 594. So there's a bug in there somewhere. I'm not totally sure what's going on, but the thing I like about the National Tree Benefit Calculator is it's right there, and it's really quick, and you can get some answers right off the bat. I haven't found any errors that seemed egregious to me. So even though I'm telling you here's a little quirk of this thing, I can't tell you not to use it just because there's a lot of times where you just really want a number fast. I don't think you're going to get a number that's wildly wrong without it jumping out at you yourself. So I don't know how to say that any more clearly, but I hope that makes some kind of sense. So the National Tree Benefits Calculator only does one tree at a time. I think I forgot to say in the last one, I've separated out information on the values, like the pounds of CO2 or the kilowatt hours of electricity, and does it put a dollar value on those? One of the big failings of the National Tree Benefits Calculator is it doesn't talk about the total carbon storage of the tree up to the date that we're talking about, and that's something that we often need to have. It does talk about carbon sequestered annually. It talks about the energy conservation. The thing that's nice about it is it does give you some numbers for the stormwater, and it does give you some dollar values for the improvements in air quality broken down by the different pollutants. It doesn't talk about the pounds of the different air pollutants, probably because as a number, the pounds are really small, though they can, even a small reduction in air pollutants on a per tree basis is quite valuable. It won't project future benefits. It does not have any, it's even less useful in its reporting feature because you can't cut and paste. You would have to actually type those numbers in. But it takes seconds, and it's on the web. There's no downloading of anything, and it's really easy to use. So that is its pros and cons. Next tool is iTree, which just got mentioned. iTree is a whole suite of software products. There's really, I think at this point, 8 or 9 different ones. it's a collaboration between the Forest Service, the Center for Urban Forest Research again, and also their colleagues at the Northeast Research Station in upstate New York, and Davy Tree, which is a gigantic tree, a private company that does both tree care, usually at the citywide level, with the big contracts for cities. They also do a lot of research. They have a Davy Resource Group, which helps with cities to develop management plans. They have an institute where they do their own research and programming, and so the iTree suite has actually been programmed by them, and they're sort of the lead in distributing it and supporting it. And it's all free because it was already developed with your tax dollars, so there are no more future charges to the public. And I've worked with them for many years and find them to be very helpful. So I'm going to talk about these 4 aspects of it. The first 2 very quickly because they're very, very in-depth projects that I don't think anybody will be doing, and certainly if you are, you need way more. You need somebody to tell you a lot more about them than I can do that today. But I want to touch on them because they really are so valuable, and some of the groups you might be working with might have done them, or might be able to be convinced to pursue them. So first up is iTree Eco, and iTree Eco will actually give you a picture of the total urban forest, which is pretty unusual. By that I mean all of the trees everywhere, trees on private property, trees on public property. It's really hard to study trees on private property because most don't want, or even if they do, they're not home for you to do it. So to actually get field data collected on private property is tricky, and the way ECO goes about it is to do sample plots. So you lay out across the area that you're going to study about 200 plots in the field, and they're about 1/10 of an acre in size. And you visit each one of those plots, and you collect an enormous amount of data. So you look at every tree that's inside the plot, and the trees that are outside the plot that put shade in the plot. For all of those, you're going to measure the trunk diameter, the height, the crown height, how many sides the tree light hits, the condition of the crown, the condition of the other parts of the tree, any buildings that might be shaded by the trees that fall within the plot, how far are they, what direction. Anyway, you get the idea. This goes on and on and on. But you can then use those 200 plots to extrapolate to the condition of the entire urban forest. So in a lot of cases, you still are knocking on people's doors and asking them to look in their backyard, but you don't have to do it for everybody's backyard in order to get this picture of your data. Normally, an eco project is a whole summer-long project with several teams, often of volunteers or interns, out there for light hours. What you get back is very science-oriented data. So it tells you a lot about the structure of the urban forest, what kinds of species do you have, what benefits are they providing in terms of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas capture, stormwater, air quality, all of that. Because it's a sample, it doesn't actually tell you where any of the trees are. And it doesn't even really give you a good sense of how the canopy is distributed, but nevertheless, it gives you a very detailed picture in broader terms of what you actually have out there. Its companion is iTree Streets. And so the idea with iTree Streets was that it's targeted mainly at the cities themselves who have a resource of trees to manage, and it's usually the street trees themselves that the city is responsible for, needs to take care of, needs to have some ideas about how they're going to be managed. And so the vision of iTree Streets is you either go out, you could collect an inventory of all of the street trees, and in some of these smaller communities in the Central Valley, that's totally something that's doable in just a couple of weeks of time. In larger communities, you would probably just want to do a random sample of about 10% of the city blocks. So it has to be random. You visit those blocks that are identified in the sample, and you measure, at the very least, for every tree on that block, you would note its. And from that, we can estimate all of these benefits that are provided: the greenhouse gases, stormwater, energy conservation, air quality improvement. In this case, you'll also get information on that property value improvement. The thing that makes this one different from ECO is the data collection is a lot less onerous There are other fields that you can collect, but you don't really need them for this purpose. And it's all on public land. The results that you get are more management oriented. So you're still going to get a lot of numbers, like this many pounds of CO2 are absorbed and this many pounds of air quality, which equals out to this many dollars. But it'll also help you get a better sense of what is the age distribution of my street tree population. Like, are all my trees really old, and therefore in the next 10 or 15 years are they going to start to die, require huge amounts of maintenance? How can I plan for that future? How can I start to plant new trees to be ready to take over when the older trees die? Or let's say, is my population very dependent on one species, which could be threatened by a pest or a disease that might move into the area? And if that happens, I could lose a huge proportion of my trees all at once. How can I plan from a management perspective to avoid that kind of thing? So these two have some overlaps in what you get out of them, and also in what you put into them. So it's just a question of it's just a case of trying to figure out what you need to know and what resources you have in terms of time and funding in order to collect the information. All right, to get into the sort of more fun things, this iTree design is a little bit like the National Tree Benefits Calculator, but it's better. So probably this would be the thing you would turn to first. It's just maybe a little bit more work involved in this one. So in iTree Design, this is also a web-based tool. It's I'll show you. I think I put the website's definitely there on that first iTree slide, but it's just itreetools.org/design. And here you enter an address that you want to look at, and then you draw the house that the trees are going to relate to on the property. So if you see right here, this thing with the blue outline is the house that I'm looking at. And I'm going to enter the trees that are around that house to figure out the benefits for the trees in terms of the carbon that they're sequestering, but also how they're relating to this building in terms of energy conservation. So just draw the outline of the house, enter a couple of questions about it, and say, okay. And then these take a little bit longer to load. We're going to enter some information about the first tree. So the first tree I'm going to add is a southern magnolia. It's got a 20-inch trunk diameter. The trees, some questions about the tree's condition. And once you've added that, this circle of green and yellow, there should actually be some orange on here too, appears showing you how those benefits change based on where you put your tree. And so this is also another fun one to play around with. I mentioned just using the tree carbon calculator, that Excel sheet, to change variables and see what happens. In this case, this is actually a little bit more visual. It's just a little bit harder to change your data in a way that happens quickly, but I think there's a lot of benefits to this too. So as I move, here's my tree, as I move it around, my numbers down here are going to change. And we can also see by the color scheme where, generally speaking, the best benefits are. So the darker green comes on the western side. I think this is based on the climate reason that I'm not getting any orange. I think play around with the region that you're in, and I think that in the Central Valley areas, you're going to see that up here, it's going to recommend not planting a tree just because you're not going to get any of the energy conservation benefits that you would if you planted the tree on the west or the east. So once I've put my tree down there, I can ask it to, hang on, I'm trying to make myself not push the arrow again. Come on. This one will let you estimate benefits going forward into the future. So I think I skipped over that one there, but I said, please show me the benefits for the current year and 40 years going into the future. So here it looks very similar to the National Tree Benefit Calculator. Oh, see, it's skipping ahead on me because it was designed by the same people. Stop, stop, stop. Okay, so here are overall benefits in the current year. It's going to show me benefits for stormwater, energy, air quality, and carbon dioxide. And then down the left side, it'll show me what the benefits are 40 years from now. It'll show me the total, what's happened over those 40 years, and then the total to date. So just to dig in to the carbon dioxide one, I'm looking at the total to date. So to date, this is the total number of storage, not that annual number, my 20-inch southern magnolia has captured about 1,800 pounds of CO2, and it has helped me to avoid releasing about 400 pounds of CO2 by reducing the amount of energy that's used. So I'll leave that again we're running out of time here, so an exercise for you all to dig deeper into that one and see how those numbers change based on what you are actually, what criterion you actually enter. iTree Canopy is quite different from the other ones that we've talked about, but I want to throw it out there because I used it to do one of the grant applications this round for a small town that was looking to develop a forest management plan. I wanted to be able to say, well, they have this tree canopy, and their vision is to go to this percentage of tree canopy. That is how much of the area is covered by trees. Looking down from a bridge of the area is covered by trees, and we say, let's say it was 15%, we want to get to 20%. How would that increase the benefits? In addition, iTree Canopy is just kind of fun. It's a quick and dirty recipe that is over your region. So it's also web-based. It's itreetools.org/canopy. First, you need to define the project area, and you can either do it by hand, or if you have a GIS shapefile, you can upload that. I chose to do it by hand really quickly, drew an outline of San Francisco. If you do one of these, do a better job of outlining it. You don't want to miss all this stuff, and you definitely don't want to draw a straight line across the bottom unless that's actually the boundaries of your city. So once you've got that, you define your what's called cover category. So in this case, all I wanted to know is what my tree canopy is. How much of that area is covered by trees? So all I have is tree or non-tree. You could go a lot more crazy as they suggest here. You could calculate what's water, what's impervious surface, what's grass. But for the sake of this example, we're going to stick with tree and non-tree. And then what it does, and I don't know if you can see this, I made this big red arrow so you can see there's a little yellow cross there, like a little cross hatch. It's going to show me as many times as I ask it a spot in the city. Just picks a random spot, and I say whether that's a tree or it's not a tree. And in this case, it's definitely not a tree, it's a roof. So I say non-tree, and then I ask it for another one. And that's going to show me another crosshatch as soon as it moves on. See, really hard to see this one, but it's right there. It's always right in the middle. Tree or non-tree. And that's going to show me another one. Tree or non-tree, tree or non-tree. And what's happening over time is this is my, see the T stands for tree. It's saying right now I've only done 10 points. The estimates that like percent canopy cover for San Francisco is 22%, and 78% is not a tree. Now, if I'd only done 2, I would have had a non-tree and a tree. So right there, at that point, it's going to say it's 50%. When I get the third one, it's going to say it's 33% tree canopy cover and 66% no tree. So the more you do, the smaller your standard error gets. So here's my standard error right now. On the tree side, 15%. On the non-tree side, 30%. So what you're looking for to get a good sense of what your canopy cover is a standard error down around 3 to 5%. And it takes maybe about 100 to 150 points, depending on how variable your city is or how big it is too, to get a number that you can live with. But 100 to 150 points takes less than an hour. It takes a lot less than an hour. I mean, to make this decision takes 5 seconds, and to mark it takes a second. So once you get to a number that you feel good about, you say that you're done. And you say report, and you get back this. So you do not want to do what I did here, which is just stop with 10 points and have a standard error that's really not tolerable. But I wanted to just give this as an example. Right now it's telling me that in San Francisco, the tree canopy cover is about 20%, and that 20% provides these general benefits. Now look at it's saying carbon dioxide stored in the trees, right? So this is not the annual rate. This is the total up to date. Is worth about $13 million plus or minus 9.5 million. So that's an insane standard error. Obviously, you want to keep going. These numbers will be taken with a grain of salt. But for the purposes, for instance, of that grant application that I did, this is some great data that you otherwise would pay tens of thousands of dollars to get. And you don't really want to spend that kind of money on a grant application. All right, so here's the iTree suite. Here's the summation. I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna skip over that and let you have a look at it for yourself and just talk quickly about the last couple of things. EcoSmart Landscapes is also a web-based tool. The website's back on that first slide that I showed over, looking at the tool overview. It works very similarly to iTree Design. So this is not a member of the iTree suite. This is also a Forest Service project in collaboration with a private company. I find this quite hard to use. Its big advantage is because it's still an active project with the Forest Service, it has the newest growth data in it. I think that's going to change over the next couple months, and these other tools will catch up. But for now, I honestly find this too difficult to use, but I wanted to make you aware of it out there and give you some ideas about what it does. It's similar. You draw the parcel, you draw the building, you enter some information about the building, you put some trees around, you enter the trees around it, their species and their trunk diameter. If they're existing trees, if they're planned trees, then you let it know that you want to see, like I envision planting this tree here, what's going to happen in the future. You tell it how many years you want it to project into the future. And slowly, have faith, Colleen, that it's going to change. It gives you a bunch of reports in the table form that can actually be exported. So I only put 2 trees in there. So this is the first tree, eucalyptus, starting in 2014 and going up 40 years. It estimates how, starting from the tree at its current trunk diameter, it estimates how big it's going to get, how high it's going to get. It's going to be stored. This, again, is a summation of that whole of over a lifetime, and this is what's happened in the last year. It also will show us for each tree individually, and then in terms of energy and the CO2 associated with the energy reductions, it shows all the trees together, which I think is one of its weaknesses. Sometimes you really want to be able to look at each tree individually. So here is the energy conserved, and here is the CO2 reductions associated with that conserved energy. There's also an enterprise version. So the one that I just showed you is free. It's on the web. This enterprise version, I think, is software that you actually would have, that you definitely have to pay for, and I think you get the software in return. Its big benefit is that it lets you import large numbers of trees all at once, and then it estimates the current and future energy conservation benefits and the greenhouse gas benefits. Its failing here is that the energy conservation benefits are not specific to they make a lot of assumptions that the trees are distributed in a certain way around buildings. So in the free version, you're actually saying, here's the tree and here's the building next to it. In this case, you're saying, hey, I think these trees are distributed around buildings in this general way. Your answers are not as location specific. And so here's its little summary table, and I'm going to skip over. And then 2 sort of differently related things, but I wanted to talk about them because I think they might be useful tools for everybody. One is a product called OpenTreeMap, and this is an open-sourced, web-based, collaborative tree mapping tool that lets, depending on how you set it up, it lets users enter trees, and it allows for the incorporation of existing official data from cities. So it's a little bit different from all the other things we've been talking about. If you go to the opentreemap.org website, you'll see the different ones for the different cities. There's one in San Francisco. There's one in Greenprint for the Greenprint region around Sacramento. The San Francisco and the Greenprint region maps are an older version, so they don't look like this, but they do the same things. They just have different features. There's also one in San Diego and then a couple in other parts of the country. And I think we have some hopes of making use of this to document trees that are planted for these tree planting grants that we're talking about with CAL FIRE. So anyway, in this case, users, if you choose to let users participate, they create an account, and then they can add trees to the map. They can tell us about the tree, what species it is, how big it is. They can upload photos. They can enter information about the planting site, how big it is, where the tree planted in the street, along the street, or in a planter, or in a median. They can do some tree alerts. I walked by this tree and it's blocking a street sign, or it needs to be weeded. They can also track tree stewardship. I've pruned this tree. I adjusted the stakes and ties. And then for each tree, also the ecosystem services are provided. So those benefits we've been talking about: the carbon stored to date, carbon removed, the energy conserved, air quality, and stormwater. And you can also leave comments. In this case, the person was asking what exact species of ficus it is. But you could also be telling a story. I planted this tree to mark the birth of my first child, and now it's 50 years old. Or that's the kind of public participation we're trying to encourage. And finally, really quickly, for everybody who's interested in urban forestry, is the newly released Urban Tree Key that helps you figure out what the tree is that you're looking at, because particularly in the West, there is no real good book source to do this. Most of our books are about identifying trees in forests, and those trees are very, very different from the ones that we see on the streets. So the Urban Tree Key just walks you through a tree key that you might remember from the 8th grade. What kind of leaves does it have? Then steps you through all of that with pictures. It's designed so that the website works very nicely on a phone or a tablet too, so you can do it while you're out there in the field. And then finally is just the comparison of the different tools and the different things that they do, how much effort is required, what the format is, and the different results that they give you. So that was a lot. Thank you, everyone. I see that we still have 18 people at least logged in. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And also, like I said, this will go out to you as a PDF with all the links live so that you can check on any of these things yourself pretty easily.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kayleen. That was absolutely fabulous, and a really, really great intro to all of the different tools that do exist out there. I'm not seeing any questions from any of the attendees or the members right now, but I'll give it just a few more seconds in case someone is furiously typing in a question.
And my email address was on the first slide, so if people have questions, they're more than welcome to ask.
Perfect. And as they have been saying, members, we will definitely get PDFs of both of these presentations, and we have recorded the session today. So if you do have specific questions that you might encounter later as you're actually out there working with these, we'll definitely have the opportunity to go back and sort of look through things and check some of the links and whatnot, and rewatch everything just for the fun of it. Let's see. We do have one question. Do you have any graphics or specific resources for benefits from using trees as a windbreak on the side of a house?
That's a good question. It's not quite as relevant in California as it is in other parts of the country. But if you go to the community tree guides, the slide I had that showed the different community tree guides, it has some great graphics showing, each one of those tree guides talks about how you can use trees to reduce energy costs in the winter too, from how to pick the right kind of species of tree to where to plant them, the things you need to know about windbreaks, like the fact that the vegetation really needs to come all the way to the ground, how high they need to be in maturity, and it has some great graphics showing a little house and some trees and how the wind moves over them. All of those community tree guides will have those, and it's helpful to know that by and large, if something is included in one of those community tree guides, it is not copyrighted because it is a government publication. Still, it's always nice to know where you got them from, but you should feel free to use any of the graphics in those community tree guides because they are public property.
Excellent. And a follow-up question regarding sort of the same graphics, is there also information regarding shading and using trees as shading on the side of houses or buildings as well? Same community tree guides or maybe a different source?
The community tree guides are a great resource because also I think people will find them as a great resource because they're written in a language that is the kind of language you would want to use with your constituents. So they're definitely for the general public. So there's both the graphics there and then some straightforward layman's language about how to strategically plant trees to get the best energy benefits. Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, it looks like that is the only question that has come in. So I will make sure that all of the attendees do have both your and Nancy's information if any other questions do come up. And in the meantime, just thank you so much today for being able to come and present to us.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, you're welcome, and we're looking forward to doing more.
Wonderful. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.